already, and my apologies, Tom. Yes, we have Tom, Marcos, and Amitabh. I think they require no particular introductions. Each of these members have represented government or do represent government in very important ways today. And what I'd like to do is just start by offering each of them the opportunity to just perhaps give us a bit of an opening remarks on A, their context, and B, just a few remarks from each of you would be terrific. We are here today to discuss policy and shifts that we might make in policy to enable our progress towards social and development goals, sustainability and development goals. So thank you. Tom, if you don't mind, may I start with you?
Thank you. And let's start off by saying what a great pleasure it is to be here today for this gathering in India and see the enormous growth in this movement. So it's very, very exciting and very encouraging. My name's Tom Laki, and I run a unit in the UK government called the Inclusive Economy Unit. A number of you here may have known our predecessors, the Social Investment and Finance team. The UK government's been a very strong supporter of the movement to develop impact investment for about 20 years. And we've been lucky enough to be very supported by and supportive of Ronnie and his efforts dating way back to the late 1990s and the Social Investment Task Force that Ronnie led. So this is a long journey that we've been on as a country in the UK and as a government. The work that we do in our unit covers a number of areas. So we lead across the UK government on social impact investment. We house the Centre for Social Impact Bonds, which we've been talking a lot about in the last 2 days, and I'd be delighted to share more experience with that. We're now deploying in the region of £250 million worth of social impact bonds in the UK context, dealing with issues such as rough sleeping, early healthcare interventions, children on the edge of care. So we're really beginning to see some momentum and some growth in that sector. And a third key area that we look after is the growing interest of the UK government in the whole area of responsible business, which is a huge and growing route to impact economies. We were just talking outside about one of the challenges that government faces in addressing this agenda, which is it's so cross-cutting that it's quite a struggle, or it can be quite a challenge for government to know where in government these functions sits. So where does government drive innovation from, which parts of government? In the same way that we see within major corporates, the issues around corporate responsibility often sat in very different parts of corporations, whether it's in the corporate affairs functions or the communications functions or the strategy functions. Similarly, one of our observations is that certainly in the UK government, but in governments across the world, these are such cross-cutting issues that we find them sitting in different parts of government. So we, these days, sit in a part of government called the Office for Civil Society that sits in the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, but we work with a mandate right across government, and we work with our Department for Business, the Treasury, and the line departments that deal with public services. Just make a last remark about the relevance of the SDGs in the UK context, that the UK government is one of the strong supporters of the SDGs, and colleagues here from our Department for International Development are very closely involved in driving SDGs across the world. One of my observations would be that the language of the SDGs is not as yet relevant or resonating closely with our domestic audiences. So if we talk to our politicians, if we talk to media, or if the politicians want to communicate to the public, SDGs would be a language that they would find to be quite a difficult language to explain what we're trying to accomplish here. But the flip side of that is that we're seeing increasing language being used in the public debate in the UK to get at what are very much the same concepts that are dear to us. So our current Prime Minister, Theresa May, when she came into power 2 years ago, gave a very powerful speech on the steps of Downing Street, in which she talked about creating an economy that worked for the many, and talked about shared prosperity, and talked about addressing the burning injustices in society. And certainly in the 2 years since then, and partly stimulated by the referendum that we had in the UK, there's an increasing and a growing recognition in the public debate in the UK that the current structure of our economy isn't working for all the people in the country, and that people are beginning to rethink and reimagine what the market economy might look like in the UK so that it benefits all people. So even if the language of impact economies and SDGs isn't yet being used, we're certainly seeing an opening up of the debate in many of the ways which we would find very encouraging in this gathering.
Thank you, Tom. And Amitabh, maybe turning to you, just given the level of innovation we've seen and the change we've seen with the new government, with the government, in particular the formation of Niti Aayog. I know you focused a lot on outcomes, and that's been quoted world over as an example of government starting to focus on things that matter versus simply inputs. Why don't you give us a little bit of the thinking behind that and where you are today?
So one, that our challenges are very different from the challenges which UK is confronted with, simply because of India's geographical size and scale. We are bigger than 24 countries of Europe plus another 30,000 kilometers, and with a 1.3 billion population, the challenges of nutrition, education, health are enormous. And one of the key things which the government has actually done is to focus very clearly on defined outcomes. For years, India has been doing financial and physical monitoring, but this government moved away from that and clearly said these are the outcomes we are expecting, and those outcomes have been clearly monitored at the highest level. So Niti Aayog's key role, and Niti Aayog is the national institution for transforming India, its key role has been to do monitoring and evaluation based on defined outcomes for the Prime Minister of India. And most of these have largely related to the social sector. The second key thing I want to make is that it's very important, for India has attracted over, if you look at the period between 2010 to 2016, India has attracted over about close to $5.2 billion as through impact investment bonds. In 2060, we've attracted about 1.1 billion. But the challenges of India are so enormous that if you want results in a vast range of areas, I mean, if you look at just nutrition, for instance, 1 in 2 women are anemic, 1 in 3 children are stunted. But this government's key focus has been to drive several sectors which will make a huge impact in terms of social sectors. So its focus has been on nutrition, its focus has been on health. We've rolled out the largest possible scheme called the Ayushman Bharat, which is about linking up 150,000 primary health centers to the district hospitals digitally. They're all linked digitally now. And what it enables people who go to primary healthcare centers to do is to get medical advice from the doctors at the district hospital digitally. The second component of that is to roll out for close to about 50 crore Indians, that's about 500 million people, national health insurance scheme of up to rupees 500,000. That is, they are fully insured up to rupees 500,000, and this national health insurance scheme will target 500 million, which is more than the population of USA, Europe, and Mexico put together. So it's the largest health insurance scheme rolled out. And thirdly, a huge focus on learning outcomes, where India had not performed. We've been able to provide access of education. One of India's biggest achievements has been its ability to provide access of education to everyone, but its inability to provide good learning outcomes. And the government's focus has been to ensure that our learning outcomes radically improve and in all these programs. So if you were to look at the map of India, while several regions of India, the western region, the northern India, does extremely well, the eastern part of India and about close to 115 districts of India don't perform so well. We don't call them the backward districts of India, we call them the aspirational districts of India. And what we are doing there is to have a base level on 49 defined indicators. We have their base level. We do their outcome-based monitoring. We capture their delta on real-time data. And for impact investors, this is critical. The critical aspect is our ability to get real-time data, capture delta, the change on a real-time basis. So we are making districts compete minute to minute, hour to hour, days to days, and on every day the district collector is able to find out whether on 49 indicators they have gone up or gone down. And we have ensured a massive competition between 115 districts on these defined 49 indicators. So my view is, if you're putting data in public domain, you are enabling districts to understand that good governance will be good politics, and that if you are not performing, you will come down the ladder. And that means public will then question you for your lack of performance on these 49 indicators. And all this has been put out in public domain for the 115 districts. All outcome indicators out in public domain. And to my mind, this real-time data, outcomes, and putting everything in public domain is the key to actually bringing in good governance.
Thank you, Amitabh, for that both incredibly informative, inspiring, and impassioned view. I think maybe turning quickly over to Marcos. Marcos has the unique benefit of actually having been inside the government and now outside, fighting what I might argue similar battles, but from two perspectives. So maybe, Marcos, over to you for a few remarks and maybe a perspective on what you've learned coming to the other side.
Okay, I'm former National Secretary of Innovation at the Ministry of Industry. I left the position 2 months ago, but I'm still a civil servant from the ministry. I just spending a time out of the ministry. But I was responsible for the national strategy for impact investment in social business in Brazil. It was a 10-year period strategy that we launched at the beginning of this year in our country. Looking from both perspectives, I'm also a board of director member of Brazilian NAB. So I have a foot in the government and other in the Brazilian NAB. When we start this initiative, if we go back in time 2 years ago, there were only few people in the government, Brazilian government, that had heard about impact investment. Almost nobody knew what was it. Only few people knew. I didn't know at that time. But so Brazilian NAB approached me, and they present what was happening in the world and in Brazil in this topic. And it was really similar to what I was doing as a National Secretary of Innovation, because I was developing venture capital industry, I was developing policies for regulatory framework, I was developing policies for startups. So it was similar to what we were doing. But the people start to ask, why the Ministry of Industry and why the Secretary for Innovation, the Brazilian ministry? First, that we identify a good economic development potential for the segment in Brazil. Second, that we think that would evolve our innovation policies and innovation outcomes, because in our ministry, we don't consider innovation only technology. We consider innovation in business model, services, process, organization, and whatever. And you know that impact business, there's a lot of innovation to be financially viable. So that's are the main reasons, and the ultimate reasons that we use to attract other members of the government was that it could be a driver to improve the quality of public services in Brazil. They could be a really good channel to offer more services to more people in better quality in a cost-effective way. So this was the first part of the process. And the first thing we did, it was to acknowledge that we didn't know nothing about the topic. So that's the important role of the Brazilian NAB, because since the day one, they almost trained us about what was happening. They gave us knowledge, they gave us connection, including here with GSG. And so we could use this knowledge and connections in order to mobilize the rest of the government. Because we had two choices. We could develop a policy only for the Ministry of Industry, or we could try to do a harder way that would be to mobilize all the government. And we choose the latter, because we saw that the challenges were so big that only one ministry would not be enough to solve. And that's why we choose the harder way, because we had to evangelize and to show and convince different bodies in the government about the importance of this initiative. Just to give an example, this strategy was developed together with 16 different bodies in the government, different ministries, different agencies, and different public banks, together with the civil society, investors, entrepreneurs, and also the private sector, I mean the corporates. So we co-designed together this policy, and I think it was really wise, because the policy now is a state policy. It's not a government policy, because it's a 10-year period. It's not from our ministry, it's from the government, and there are different players in the government that is involved in this process. I can name two that are here: the Export Promotion and Investment Attraction Agents with Jaime is here. Nobody thought that the Export Promotion and Investment Attraction Agency would be involved in this kind of things. But they are, and they are really involved. And there is also the Ministry of Social Development that's already represented here. So we mobilize 16 bodies in the government, more 10 from the private sector and civil society. Because doing that, we were able to cover all the needs that the system have in Brazil. And also, we didn't, we thought that was important, that all the policies were in place at the same time. So we followed GSG strategy, focusing 4 main pillars: increase capital, increase the number of social business, increase and improve intermediaries, and regulatory framework. Those are the 4 pillars of our strategy. We followed GSG, and it was important because none of this is coordinated by our ministry. They are coordinated by private sector or some institutions in the other institutions in the government. So that's what we did in the last year in Brazil.
Terrific, thank you. We're going to shake this up a bit now, and the panelists have no idea what I'm about to ask. So we'll see how this goes. You've all represented government in some way or another, and still do. I have to tell you, the government is not known or looked to for innovation. And we do look to government for checks and balances. We look to the government for brakes. We look to the government to stop the bad guys. You know, we also know there's a bit of a consensus. We will always ask the rich and the powerful and philanthropists to do more good, as long as we never ask them to do less harm. And we've always looked to the government to stop those from doing harm. But we've never really looked to the government on the question of innovation. And so this question, I think, let me start, Amitabh, with you, and then ask, why should we look to the government for innovation? What can the government do to stimulate innovation in a way that we have not seen come from the private sector, or harness it at a scale that we haven't seen before?
Vivek, I think the job of the government is to create the right ecosystem for innovation. The government must be a facilitator and a catalyst for a great amount of innovation. And for many of these problems of society, particularly challenges of India, you need a huge amount of innovation. And you know, about a year and a half back, when we launched the Startup India movement, many of our young innovators were all relocating to Silicon Valley at that point, or to Singapore. But now we see a reverse inflow of many of our startups relocating to Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, simply because we've been able to create the best possible ecosystem. And it's not that we've been able to create great e-commerce companies which are today being bought for 21 billion by Walmart, but I'm amazed to see the great amount of social innovation that is taking place in India. And I mean, look at a young girl called Pranshu Bhandari. She started with Culture Alley, but then she realized that it's not Chinese and Japanese and Mandarin which people are interested in learning, but the English language. And she started teaching English language through her mobile app. And in 1 year time, she's taught 9 million Indians how to speak English. 9 million Indians. Not a single school or college has been able to do it, in India. Or look at when the tsunami happened in Chennai, and the government, many people were stranded and government couldn't reach out food packets. It was one of our social innovators, social cops, which assisted the government of Tamil Nadu to track every single individual who'd been stranded and to whom food packets had to be reached out. It was just sheer ability to innovate, and much of that innovation actually is happening in the world of education and health in India. I mean, we have about 20,000 startups, just 4,000 in the world of tech, but many of them doing amazing work in the world of education, health, nutrition, some of them doing great work in the field of agriculture. Look at a startup like Baiju, where Mark Zuckerberg has invested his personal money. Or look at Guru. I mean, what are they doing? They're tracking every single individual who's getting left behind in school today, every single student who's getting left behind, tracking him down longitudinally, latitudinally, much like we track Uber, and providing extra support or extra marks. They are tracking individual students to be able to provide a huge amount of assistance and support to these students to rise up. Or we've had this great, in one of our aspirational districts, Banka district of Bihar, one of the most backward districts. It's one of our aspirational districts. The district collector there, Kundan Kumar, has used mobile technology and worked with a bunch of young social innovators to provide education in regional language across that. And we've seen learning outcomes jump up by close to 42% in that area. So look at Mitra Biotech, which relocated from Silicon Valley into Bangalore. I mean, doing personalized cancer care. Or Conscio Medical, which has been able to link every single individual to doctors across India and provided immediate medical support to them. So we are seeing a huge amount of social innovation in health, in education. I mean, AgroStar, for instance, providing feed, seeds and fertilizer to farmers on a real-time basis based on the weather and soil conditions across Maharashtra, which has enabled productivity to jump up by about 21% in the region in which they work. So my view is that there are enormous challenges in India. The Western world has always innovated. Silicon Valley has always innovated, but they've done innovation for defense weapons. They've done innovation for driverless cars. These are not the innovations India needs. India needs innovation for health, education, nutrition. And if we are able to find solutions to our problems, the problems of India, we'll actually be finding problems to the 7.5 billion people of the world who will be moving from poverty to middle class in the next decade. And that is where the challenge lies.
Tom.
Thank you.
That is a tough act to follow. Now, you have the one advantage that the UK has, in fact, shown the way on many social innovations. And in collaboration with Sir Ronnie Cohen, and in your role over many years, you've also innovated across bonds and had the government purchase outcomes, and if you will, purchase, as we spoke about, purchase innovation. Talk to us a bit about that. Where's the innovation coming from? Is it coming from the inside? Is it coming from the outside? And as Amitabh mentioned, the role is to facilitate. How have you done it?
Well, I wish it was the case that we didn't need social innovation in health and education in Europe and in the UK, but I'm afraid we do. because we have some very serious and very profound challenges in our country. They're challenges that come from a different phase of development. They're challenges that come from the sort of deep and profound consequences of deindustrialization on our society, and the consequences that that has left for many very scarred and very shattered communities in the UK. So we have a very deep need for social innovation. And the government in the UK, like many Western governments, the American government similarly, I think, finds it almost intractable set of challenges to think about how we undertake large-scale reforms of very huge, very complex, deeply entrenched systems of public service provision in the UK. So innovation is something that's very difficult. I think the last Prime Minister in the UK who tried to seriously reform public services was Tony Blair, and he talks about the scars he has on his back from the effort to undertake those reforms. So we desperately need innovation in our social systems, in our education systems, in our health systems, that, as Amitabh says, can match the innovation that we see in our countries in pharmaceuticals, in technology, in energy systems. And I think that this question really gets to the essence of what's so exciting about the impact revolution, is that it is the place where we see the energy coming from now to identify new ways of doing things. That the contrast in the debates that you see in the UK within government, where people sometimes feel almost overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges and the difficulty of reforming them, versus the extraordinary energy and the optimism that we see in the social entrepreneurs and some of the responsible businesses to take ownership of and address these problems. And so if you look at the portfolio of investments, for example, that Big Society Capital has put together in the last few years in the UK, it's an extraordinary source of innovation and inspiration for new ways of addressing some of these social problems. And I think that this is perhaps the most unique contribution that this movement can make to solving our challenges. As Vivek says, the UK may have the most mature market for social investment bonds in the world, but it's still at a tiny scale compared to the scale of the social challenges that we need to meet. I was in Sheffield, it's a city in the north of England, 2 weeks ago. Sheffield used to be the centre of the UK steel industry, and of course is now suffering from all of the symptoms of industrial decline. Sheffield may be the most ambitious city in the world for social impact bonds. They're using social impact bonds as a way of rethinking and linking up how they deal with public services right across the city. And we're working with them to put together a set of social impact bonds that may come to £100 million, which is extraordinarily exciting. But as the leaders of the city said to us when we were up there, if you add up the total amount of public money that's put into the social sector in Sheffield every year, it's £4 billion. What social impact bonds is bringing to a city like Sheffield is innovation. It's an opportunity to learn how to do new things in a different way that we can then start to scale and bring innovation into the system.
Thank you, Tom. Marcos, maybe a few words from you on innovation. We know that there's been a tremendous amount of work, actually both across Latin America, but of course in Brazil in particular, on trying to help many displaced populations, and in some sense Brazil, on some degree of its scale, mimics India in some of the issues that you're faced with. Talk to us a bit about some of the innovation that you're seeing come out of Brazil, and again, where's the innovation coming from? Is it coming from the private sector? Is it coming from within the government? Is it coming from the people? And to what extent are consumers driving it versus people with big ideas and big checkbooks?
Okay. I will share this answer in two parts. One is how to innovate in government. Innovate in government, I think you have to use both approaches, internal and external. Why? Because you have good ideas and potential to do really nice things in government, but sometimes you don't have the resource or the execution capability or management skills. And if you use outside players to innovate in government, it sometimes doesn't fit because it's really usually is from the private sector, it doesn't fit in the government. So the best way is to combine both, to be open and fluid in the government, to have also support from the private sector. I'll give you two examples. One is about how to innovate inside the government. 5 years ago, we decided to create a startup accelerator program in Brazil, and everybody told us that we were crazy because this was something that the private sector should do, that government is not innovative enough, and so on. I think they missed the point that the people in the government, they are really good people there. And I came from the venture capital industry, so I knew the situation, I knew I could create something better than the market was offering. The result, 5 years later, we have now the largest startup accelerator program in Latin America. It was awarded as the best accelerator in Brazil 2 years ago, beating all the private sector accelerators. And is a typical example of how government can innovate. But we innovate together with the private sector in the design of this process. The second is outside. We must be open to attract new ideas from impacting entrepreneurs, investors, and so on, to make us update what's happening in the world. So one example that happened this morning during the breakfast. We have this program, and I was invited to participate in a Capria venture base camp that they provide this training for Indian incubators last week. And it's the best program that I saw in the world to train startups. The best. So we are open now, together with the Brazilian app, to try to pilot and implement this initiative that's happening here in India, developed by a venture capital fund from the US, in our program in Brazil. So this is important to open. So this is how I think we should innovate in government. Cooperating and collaborating and co-design with the private sector. The second aspect is how we can foster the innovation ecosystem that's around the government, which government is only a piece of this ecosystem. So we have I could say that there are two ways, the supply and demand. The supply are the typical innovation policies that we are used to. The government goes, fosters R&D, financial support schemes, and so on, attack market failures, foster accelerated new markets, traditional way about how to innovate. But there is also a challenge that I think the work that has been done here by GSG is important. That's about the demand side. How the government could use impact entrepreneurs and impact startups in order to solve the biggest challenge that they have. Because it's not because the government, as was presented here, is offering education that's a good education. And the same for other sectors. So I think we have a great opportunity to address this challenge that government have using impact investment. The challenge that we are facing now in Brazil is how we could create a regulatory framework that allows this kind of interaction. Because our public procurement law is really restricted, usually focus on low-cost products, don't focus on the outcomes of the procurement. And so this is one challenge that we are facing in Brazil, and I think the work that has been done here by GSG in the policy working group, it's a good starting point because it's like a guide for us to follow and try new things in Brazil and other countries.
Thank you. We're going to try something different. We have about 6 minutes left, and in that 6 minutes, we're going to do 2 rounds, 2 rapid-fire rounds. And the first round will have each of you answer for a minute, and I'm going to turn it over to the audience and allow audience members 1 question to each of you. So prepare, I will pick at random. The question for the rapid fire round is, we need a revolution, things are not going to resolve themselves fast enough. The IPCC report just a few days ago has made that evident with the degree to which climate change is galloping ahead of us. We talk about $2.5 trillion, 169 outcomes, 230 indicators, 17 goals. Amitabh, over to you. What will it take? Are we moving fast enough? And do you, without discussing a report card at this point, what will it take to move faster? And what would you have this audience think about?
I think the key, Vivek, is to use technology to leapfrog across sectors. I've seen this happening. You know, I was working in the fisheries sector of Kerala, and for 4 years I struggled to open bank accounts for fishermen. In India today, using biometric, and India is the only country with 1 billion biometric, 1 billion mobile, and 1 billion bank accounts. Using biometrics, I mean, when I was in Kerala, for fishermen, it used to take me 9 months, 10 months to open a bank account. But using biometrics in India, last week, I opened a bank account in 55 seconds flat. So you are technologically leapfrogging from 10 months to 55 seconds. And I think the second big radical transformation that has happened is that your ability to get data for outcomes on a real-time basis. And you know, you are able to analyze, monitor, put it out into public domain, say that you are here, whereas you should have been here, and your competitor has moved up, you remained behind. So you are making things compete on a real-time basis. And this, to my mind, is critical. And thirdly, I think the challenge really for most of us working in the field in many of these areas is to allow a lot of young innovators to grow and blossom and create the right ecosystem for that to happen. We in India have done Atal Tinkering Labs, school students from class 6 onwards. We've provided them Internet of Things, 3D printers, robots, and we did competition between slum schools, public schools, and the Indian Institutes of Technologies. You know, 3 of them to compete. And the best solutions to the problems came not from IITs, but from the slum children, because they were able to find solutions to the problems that they were confronted with. They were able to convert their waste into energy. They were able to make their water fluoride and arsenic free, whereas the IIT students were all busy doing their algorithms and their maths. But they, you know, so you have to find solutions to their problems. And this is what these students cracked.
Real solutions to real problems. Once again, Tom.
Thank you. I mean, I've always regarded India as being really the home of social innovation and social enterprise for generations. And I think a lot of the stories that we're hearing here really reinforce that world leadership position. I think in the UK, if we're going to move these things at scale, we need to find a new way of government, and the friends in the city, the friends in the financial services sector, and the friends in business to talk to each other. There's still quite a high level of residual mistrust that people talk across between government, between finance, between business. There's some quite good reasons for that, given many experiences in recent decades. We have to get past that if people are going to be able to work in a much more collaborative way.
Thank you.
Well, from last year in Chicago, Mr. Ronald Cohen highlighted the point that the government was the area that less advanced in impact investment last years. So my call for action for you is go to your governments with the best people in your network and try to convince them that is important, first point. Second, you should attack in 2 levels. One, in the higher leadership of the government, where you can use your best people to show the potential, but also in the low level of the government, in the civil servants. You must show to the civil servants about what you can do, but after they are convinced, the next step is, how do I do that? And so this is something that the Brazilian app helped a lot, because we didn't know how to develop these things. But Brazilian app searched all over the world, good experience present to us, and we could be inspired or benchmark some of this experience. So I think you should focus in government, because otherwise you will not scale up. we will not have the impact that we are looking for. But do this job in the government in these two ways. Because if you go only to the leadership, sometimes the civil service will not execute. And if you do the opposite, the high leadership will not buy this idea. So go in the same time, simultaneous in the both levels of leadership and civil servants.
I think we are at time, so we will conclude. Just in closing, I wanted to thank Amitabh, Tom, and Marcos for an incredibly effusive and inspiring set of comments today. I think we've all taken away some very important points. I'm not going to take the time to summarize them, as I might at other times, but thank you again. Thank you very much for being here.